Welcome to another episode of Magicians Only. Are you a magician? I don't think you should be listening to this. Just kidding. Everyone's welcome, whether you're a magician or not. Because if you love magic, this is the place for you. Now, today's episode is actually part of a massive masterclass deep dive that I did for Magic on the Go on a trick called the Egg Bag. It has an amazing history. There's over 80 videos available on Magic on the Go teaching you everything you need to know about that trick. But there was one thing that I did where I just kind of went on a research investigation into this one performer, Horace Goldin, and how he did the trick. Because everywhere in the reviews of his show, even though he did massive illusions, the reports were that one of the best things he ever did was the egg bag trick. It became synonymous with him, and yet his actual routine is not written anywhere. And so I thought, well, maybe I could investigate it, maybe I could piece it together. Let's have a look at that. So this is a two-part investigation into the Horace Goldin egg bag. So I've been reading a lot of the stuff that's been written about Goldin and also his biography, It's Fun to Be Fooled, which is a wonderful puff piece that's simply designed to make him seem even greater. And I think I've pieced together some interesting facts, and let's dive in and see if we can put together an idea and an impression of what his egg bag routine may have been like. You know, it was Paul Rossini who once said that he learned more about magic from reading the biographies of magicians than he ever did from a real magic book. And I think that's a pretty accurate description of where the best information in magic is hidden. So I reached out to Jim Steinmeier and I asked him if he knew about any write-up of Goldin's routine, the entire routine. And he sent me some very interesting notes. So I want to thank Jim specifically for a lot of great advice. And so what we'll do here is we'll start with those notes and we'll lead into a reading of a very special chapter. Horace Goldin loved the egg bag so much and clearly felt he was well known enough for the egg bag that in his biography, he not only talks about the trick throughout the entire book, but there's an entire chapter devoted to quote-unquote egg bag stories. Clearly, he felt this was the piece that made his reputation. So why wasn't it described in magic books? After all, magicians rip everything else off. Why wouldn't they rip off Goldin's routine? So let's have a look at some quotes in magazines and see if we can get an idea of what was going on. From the October 1902 Mahatma magazine, it said, "The time is not long ago when Horace Goldin used to make the egg bag trick the feature of his act and played pastos for the tenth of what he now gets. His ideas of humor were abortive, and his great joke was to tell what he had for the underwear that he showed when he rolled up his sleeves. Today, Goldin has a lot of tricks that are good. His dress suit has the creases in the proper places, and he gets big money. He keeps his mouth closed, and even in appearance he is more assured. He knows his value now and is not ashamed to face the audience. He stands in front of the theater and sees his name in large type, and he is working up to that type." So this is a great quote, because what it's kind of saying is that when Goldin first started out, he had cheap suits and he had tacky jokes. This is what I'm getting out of it. And we all know that he had a thick accent, and there was a very famous theatre critic who recommended that he not speak in his show, and he took that advice, and essentially that's what made him a star. But he never seemed to stop doing the egg bag. This is the thing. Even though this kind of talks about him not doing it anymore, if you read his biography, it seems he was doing it all the time. So that meant he was doing it with his thick accent and having fun with it. Maybe there was music underneath it or something like that that was kind of helping to move that thing along. I'm interested in this idea of the great joke was to tell what he had for underwear that he showed when he rolled up his sleeves. What on earth was that? Did he have a piece of underwear tucked up his sleeve? Or was he wearing long johns? Was it some kind of cheap long johns that he had underneath his evening wear that was kind of the contrast of which was quite funny? One wonders, right? I've never seen that mentioned anywhere else. In another Mahatma, we see that he's performing the egg bag in 1898. And in another Mahatma, his act is summarized from 1901. He's working without talking and no egg bag. In Stanion's Magic for December 1905, there's a routine, including an egg bag sequence by a magician called Alan Adair. During the routine, he writes about showing how the egg is concealed in his hand when you sneak it out of the bag. He also says, a little added note, De Beer and Goldin here expose the egg palmed in the hand, which I think is a great mistake. showing the egg held by the fingers as above, answers the purpose equally well and I think does no harm, especially as the audience soon realize that you're not giving them a true explanation. This is a part of the trick that I think a lot of magicians really hate, when you expose palming the egg. If you look at the video of Arnold De Beer doing it, he actually shows it palmed in his hand. And it also says that De Beer and Goldin here exposed the egg palmed in the hand. I mean, I know that Goldin did the sucker explanation, so we know he used that, as did De Beer in a way. So maybe these two guys were doing similar routines. After all, De Beer and Goldin both learned the routine from Albini, who was the creator of the egg bag as we know it now. The egg bag was around for hundreds of years, but Albini was the one who shrunk down the size of the bag and created this expose and challenge presentation that really kind of swept the music halls at the time. And Albini was the one who taught the routine specifically to Goldin. So perhaps Goldin and De Beer were doing very similar routines. In Houdini's Conjurer's Magazine, August 1908, Houdini writes that Goldin has written permission from Albini to do the egg bag trick. So this is interesting because now everybody does the egg bag trick as we know it. But in 1908, Albini's routine was so original that we actually felt the need for written permission. Because in September of 1910, in the Sphinx, Oscar Thiel writes, in answer to your requested information regarding the Albini egg bag trick, would state that Dr. Eliot, a student of Harvard College, who claims to be the originator of that buck hand card shift, showed me a similar trick to the one in question 20 years ago, or about that time, on Howard Street in Boston. Horace Goldin copied it from Albini while I was breaking him in when an amateur with my kids show around New York City, and I advised him not to do it as it was the feature of Albini's act. And he roomed with me, and during his 10-week engagement with me, he used to pin his egg bag inside his undershirt so nobody could get it. I think Albini should get the credit of its first production. This is a very interesting bit of magical writing because Oscar Thiel, a very respected magical writer, gives us some insight. First of all, Goldin said that Albini taught it to him, but maybe, first of all, maybe he stole the trick, stole the routine, and then went to Albini for permission. If you read his biography, and we'll get to the moment where Albini gives him permission in the biography, I think we see Goldin kind of sucking up to Albini to get that written permission slip. It's so funny because magicians have a history of never asking for permission to do anyone else's material. And here, the idea that Goldin and Albini had this kind of relationship where Albini gave him permission to do the routine is an interesting one. And I think it's kind of brilliant because it does a number of things. One, it advertises the trick as being Albini's creation and that Goldin has permission. And it also sets the tone that no one else is allowed to do it. So by Goldin reaching out and saying, I've got the piece of paper that says I can do it, it says a lot more than just that. The idea that you would pin the egg bag underneath your shirt shows exactly what Goldin thought about this trick and how magicians really wanted to see what kind of bag Albini was using. His bag, if you look at the teaching, you'll see that the Albini bag was quite different to the original egg bag. And I think magicians really wanted to get a hold of it. In 1933, Will Goldston publishes a book called Secrets of Famous Illusionists. There's at one point in page 197, he describes the Albini egg bag. And he says, the egg bag that I'm about to explain is, in my opinion, the best of all. The late Albini, the man who made the egg bag famous, told me that he divulged his secret to Horace Goldin, De Beer, and myself only. I am sure that every reader will appreciate the great advantage to be gained by using the bag that I will now describe. He then goes on to describe exactly how Albini's bag was made. And it is different to the usual egg bag that was out there. And you can see how different it is in the teaching on egg bags. What I find interesting here is that he taught the routine to Goldin, De Beer, and to Goldston. So maybe Goldin's routine and De Beer's routine were pretty similar. Certainly Arnold De Beer made a thing of the egg bag too. Now remember, that was published in 1933, Secrets of Famous Illusionists. It's the only time in all of his writings that Will Goldin mentions De Beer and Goldin in the same sentence when it comes to the egg bag. And remember, he said that Albini gave the trick to Goldin, and De Beer, and that the Albini egg bag, was the one that they all used. And the thing is this, Horace Goldin was Goldin's best pal. I mean, in 1931, Goldin publishes a book called Great Magician's Tricks. Horace Goldin, then a big star in magic, wrote the introduction. And in that same book, Will Goldin writes this about Horace Goldin. Horace Goldin is the greatest personality in magic today. He towers like a colossus above his confreres, beaming down on them with that benign, satisfied indulgence which is only given to those who reach the highest peaks of success. Wow. You can tell Goldin and Goldin are really, really tight. So why then, 9 years later, in Tricks of the Masters, does Goldin refer to the egg bag as being De Beer's masterpiece and doesn't mention Goldin once? I mean, Goldin was his pal and describes a bag that's quite different to the one he described back in Secrets of Famous Illusionists. Goldin considered this trick to be his property. He considered his performance of this trick to be synonymous with the name Horace Goldin, and yet here, Goldin says, the egg bag, as every magician knows, was one of Arnold De Beer's pet tricks, and during his lifetime many hundreds of magicians probably tried to discover the secret of the particular bag that De Beer used so effectively. I imagine that De Beer must have been secretly amused by his fellow magician's curiosity, for he had a keen sense of humor. De Beer's egg bag was the ordinary one, which is fascinating because he kind of implied 9 years earlier that De Beer was using Albini's bag, right? He said that he had his own bags made, for he knew the importance of having the right material, neither too thick or too thin, of having the pocket neatly made. Slightly too large might have been dangerous. Slightly too small, you wouldn't have been able to get into it. He also says that in shape, De Beer's bag differed slightly from the one generally used by magicians. De Beer made his bag in a way that he could easily show it as a circular bag. That means that the top of the bag had a binding that went all the way around. It was quite stiff, so the bag would stay open. And if you look at the video of De Beer performing the egg bag, you can see the bag kind of stays open, giving it a wonderfully empty appearance. It's looking really like they're both doing the same routine here, yet nobody ever said that. Goldin also adds that the egg bag in De Beer's hands was an illustration of the old saying that it's not what a magician does, but the way in which he does it which is important. Give a raw amateur an imitation egg and an egg bag, and he will start doing the trick at once, but he will need many hours of practice and much experience in front of audiences before he will arrive at even a good imitation of De Beer's masterly performance of this trick. There's more clues out there in magical literature. In Topps magazine of January 1938, there's a piece about Goldin appearing in London, and it says, the greatest hit still is not his much advertised Indian rope trick. Remember, this is 1938. It's not his much advertised Indian rope trick or soaring through a woman, but his humble egg bag. In Goldin's hands, this effect becomes a masterpiece, and in my opinion, is only approached by the rice bowls. He performs the whole effect in about 5 seconds, and the audience barely has time to recover its breath before Goldin is in the middle of his next effect. Well, he does claim to do 50 tricks in 50 minutes. This is a really telling review. So now we know that Goldin does the trick and does it super fast. I don't think 5 seconds. I think that was a bit of an exaggeration. But we know that he does the trick, he does it fast, because in Goldin's act was so different in his day. Magicians would take 10 minutes to do one trick. Goldin's style was to race through material and just beat his audience up with magic, which is a style that I love to use in my close-up magic. So here we have an idea. Okay, so Goldin is doing a routine. We know that it's fast. We now know that it's in the middle of a bunch of other tricks. So therefore, perhaps it's just examine the bag, make it vanish, do the sucker explanation, hold the wrist, and then pull it back out of the bag, and he's off to the next trick. And yet, they said that this was the standout effect, that it was a masterpiece. So what did he do? World's Fair, June 24th, 1939, a letter from R.G. Malcolm about magicians he'd seen. And he said, I was interested to read your reference to Horace Goldin's brusqueness. I have heard members of his audience refer to it, especially in his treatment of volunteer assistants in the egg bag trick. Now, we're going to get to Fun to be Fooled in a little bit, where Goldin talks about how he handled certain audience members on stage when they tried to mess him up. But this is an interesting thing. brusqueness, that he was aggressive, he was harsh with audience members on stage. And perhaps this was because Albini taught him the routine, and Albini was known for his brusqueness. You know, this whole idea of like, come here, put your hand in the bag, hold my wrists, and struggling and doing all that kind of stuff that Albini would do, maybe Goldin was doing it word for word. Either way, we now know that not only was it fast, but we know that he was really aggressive with the audience members. Abra, May 22nd, 1948, Graham Adams writes about De Beer doing the egg bag. We saw the great Horace Goldin too, and his presentation of the egg bag. It was a very boisterous performance, and vastly different from De Beer's, but he got just as much out of it. They were both artists, and because of it, Goldin would not show the egg bag until after De Beer's death. Who told me this I now forget, but I like to believe it. I don't believe that's true because we've seen reviews of Goldin's show that mention the egg bag, and in his biography, he's always talking about performing it on all of his gigs. Unless Goldin took it out of his theatre shows for a while. But why would he defer the trick to De Beer if he had permission to do it from Albini? So let's look at many of the egg bag references in Horace Goldin's biography, It's Fun to Be Fooled. It says, "It goes without saying that I haunted the theatres during this apprenticeship of mine. Whenever a conjurer was on, I was to be seen in the gallery, and I also haunted the stage door. And it was through this habit that I first learned the egg in the bag trick. While I was in Washington, I met Herbert Albini, an Englishman born in Manchester and a very clever manipulator who held the audience spellbound from the time he came onto the stage until he finished his act with this egg in the bag trick." That's a really interesting thing, isn't it, guys? That he finished the act with the egg in the bag trick, that Albini thought so much of it that the egg bag was his closer. Continuing on with Goldin, he was really the inventor of this very clever trick, and it made a great sensation at the time. I went to see Albini after the show, and he received me kindly, and during his week's engagement, we became friends. When I arrived at Philadelphia, I bought an egg bag from a man named Yost, a magic dealer, for $1, together with the usual printed instructions, which, after reading once, I threw away. Soon, I thought I could do the egg in the bag trick. I practiced anywhere, at any time, yet I knew I had not Albini's finishing touch, his ease and fluency. Here again, guys, is another clue. Goldin saw Albini's trick and clearly decided to rip it off. When he gets to Philadelphia, he buys the trick. He buys a simple egg in bag trick, and yet Albini hasn't taught him the effect yet, right? He thinks he can do it. Back to Goldin. I often performed the trick to perfect strangers on railway stations when I was waiting for a train. Still, I could not please myself thoroughly. Okay, so clearly here, Goldin is trying to rip off Albini. He decides he hasn't got it down. I met Albini again in New York, and at that time I idolized him as a performer. I got hold of a double crown lithograph of him and hung it up in my bedroom. I had it there for months, and during one of our meetings, I told him that I'd been practicing shadography and suggested that he come to my room to see what I could do, and he agreed. When he entered my room and saw the lithograph I'd hung up, he was very much touched, for he realized the great admiration I had for him. Yeah, right, suck up. Sorry, back to the book. I lit a candle and put the lights out and proceeded for an hour to show him different figures of shadography with my nimble fingers. He said that he thought I was good, and that if he were as good, he would show his skill to the public. He then asked me how long I'd had the lithograph in my room, and when I told him about a year, he was amazed. "I'd like to do something for you," he said. And with that, he took out a photograph from his pocket and wrote on it, "You are the only man in the world to have my permission to do the egg in the bag trick." And he signed it. He then took my egg and my bag. "There's the egg and there's the bag. I'm not going to do this trick the ordinary mug's way. I'm going to do it my way." And when he'd done it, I had to confess that he baffled me. "Hold my wrists, then perhaps you'll see." And he went through the trick with my hands around his wrists and my nose right near the opening of the bag, and still I did not guess the secret. He smiled. "Don't worry about that. I've fooled plenty of experts with that." Albini then showed me his own version of that famous trick, and that is the one that I've had in my repertoire ever since. I have baffled thousands of people with it. Kings and queens have held my wrists while I performed. All are agreed that it is one of the best tricks they've ever seen. I owe Albini a great debt. I think this is very telling. I think it shows that Goldin was a very smart guy. He knew that Albini had an ego. He puts a poster of him up on the wall, invites him to his room and makes him sit through an hour of shadow figures. But you can see that all Albini is concerned about is how long he's had the picture on the wall. I think there may have been a little more in that conversation about Albini teaching Goldin the routine. But nevertheless, in fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the picture was on the wall and the egg and the bag were on top of the dresser. You know what I mean? But clearly it's true that Goldin got permission from Albini because Houdini mentions it in a magazine. There's a moment when he talks about a performance of the egg bag and he says, "The spectator held my wrists when I did the egg in the bag trick, and though I pushed his nose into the bag, he could not see how the trick was done. He was very impressed." In fact, the spectator that he pulled up was a man who was very important and integral to the future of his career. But there's a clue there, right? There's a clue there to the brusqueness. He pushed his nose into the bag. He said earlier on, he held the bag right up to the nose of the spectator. And I think this is part of the egg bag that we miss sometimes. And this is what makes it so amazing, is you're really in the spectator's face. You're really saying, hold my wrists, look in the bag, shove your face in there. You can't see anything. And yet, look, here's the egg. A little later, Goldin talks about being hired to perform for His Majesty King Edward and the Duke of Connaught and Queen Alexandra and the Kaiser and the Prince of Wales and later King George V. And he did the egg bag for all these guys. And he met a man at the palace called George Ashton who coached him on all points of etiquette. A number of things he couldn't do. He couldn't take off his coat. Well, that's awful. He couldn't have a member of royal personage hold his wrists. And Goldin also says, when I asked him how far I could go in spoofing their majesties, he said that I could as long as I didn't make them look ridiculous. Now, it's clear here, therefore, that Goldin really liked to make his assistants look ridiculous, right? This is the clue. He's aggressive, he's boisterous, and he makes them look silly. And he asked for permission to do it to the royal personages, and he was told by Ashton not to do it. However, he says in his book that he didn't do anything that Ashton told him. He went on stage in front of the royals. He took off his coat. At one point, and this is quite interesting, he's doing the knotted handkerchiefs, and he has the Queen tie the handkerchiefs. He asks Her Majesty to feel the knots in the handkerchief, but he says, I so arranged them that she felt the places where there were no knots. I said to Her Majesty, can you feel them? And Her Majesty frowned a little bit and said she could not. And then I said, well, Your Majesty is not feeling very well. So there you go, guys. Maybe Horace Goldin was the first person to do that stock line. He then talks about performing the egg bag for the king. He says, the egg in the bag trick was the high spot of the evening. Again, Goldin keeps talking about this trick being his property, his repertoire, his masterpiece. He says, it seemed to me that His Majesty knew that it needed great skill to deceive the audience at such close range, and it was the king himself who held my hands for the trick. See that? He ignored what he was told about etiquette. He got the king up on stage, and he had the king hold his wrists. He also says, I introduced one or two new touches, and I love these touches. He says, I asked the king to feel inside the bag, and while his hand was inside, I produced the egg. We're going to talk about this when we teach the egg bag, but I do believe that this idea of having the spectator's hand still in the bag while you make the egg appear is a completely practical and brilliant addition to the egg bag. Can you imagine? I can just see wrists held, spectator's hand inside the bag, that this is a super high moment. I'm definitely putting that in my egg bag trick. He also says, after I exposed the trick in a humorous manner, but still leaving them mystified. Okay, guys, this tells us what? This tells us that he did the fake explanation, right? We know he did that. So then he says, after I exposed the trick in a humorous manner, but still leaving them mystified, performing the trick with one hand, which left my distinguished audience at a greater loss for an explanation than ever, I remember the Kaiser applauding me by snapping his knee with one hand and snapping his finger and thumb. Okay, so what we see here is also part of his routine was that he did the trick. He exposed the trick, which is the classic presentation, but then he did something with one hand. Now, what was that? Was it a way of turning the bag inside out and crumpling it? We'll talk about some of the egg bag moves, but that's something that we can add to our little list of the things that Goldin did. Now, it seems that Goldin was a frequent visitor to the palace. In fact, at one point he says that there were very interesting incidents during 4 performances that he did back to back at Sunderland House. He says, all went well until I came to the egg in the bag trick. That particular trick needs the element of surprise, and the king and queen has already seen it several times. He says there's no severer test of a trick than repetition. At one point in this trick, I make an obvious pass towards one of my pockets. Someone immediately says, it's in your pocket, and I then take my coat off and have it searched by one of the audience. It's soon evident that the egg is not in the pocket. And by the time the trick's been seen twice, everyone knows that the egg has never gone into the pocket, and no one makes the very necessary remark. And that's what happened at Sunderland House. The first time I played the trick on them, all went well. But King Edward enjoyed it so much that he asked me to do it again. When on the second occasion I came to the illusory pass, no one shouted out that the egg was in my pocket. No one, that is, until the king himself realized that unless someone did so, the trick would fall flat. He immediately came to my aid with as loud an "it's in your pocket" as I could have wished. He knew just as well as I did that it was not in my pocket at all, but he also realized how I was feeling during that terrible pause, and so he came to my rescue. So clearly he's doing the moment where he palms it out, fakes it into his pocket, maybe not under his arm, but fakes it into his pocket. Then he needs someone to call out that it's in the pocket, and that's what motivates him taking off his coat. And if that's the case, then we also know this sequence is very similar to De Beers. Now we get to the chapter 20 of It's Fun to be Fooled by Horace Goldin, a chapter called The Psychology of an Egg. Now this is what I find to be really fascinating. He wrote an entire chapter on his adventures with an egg bag. Remember, this is a book for the public, not really for magicians. And it's with great pleasure that I read that chapter for you now. If you care to go into a conjurer's dealer's shop and ask for an egg bag, you will find that you will have to pay only about $1 for it, and you'll be given a printed sheet with full instructions for use. Probably that dealer will have about 100 egg bags in his shop, all alike. All the instructions will be the same, and yet that dealer might dispose of those 100 egg bags to 100 people of differing personalities and in different stages of development in the art of conjuring. All cannot be equally successful. Though it will cost you only $1 to learn how to do the egg in the bag trick, I can assure you that before I would teach you how to do it my way, you would have to pay me £10,000. Though I have never met a conjurer or amateur who did not possess the egg in the bag trick, I have never met one who did it as I do it. Barring Herbert Albini, the originator, who gave me permission to do the trick. And I've been told many times by many people well fitted to be judges that I do that trick better than anyone else. I've already told in an earlier chapter how I came to be in possession of the egg in the bag trick, and here I'm going to tell you some of the secrets of the trick. Now, I do not intend to make an expose of it. That would fill many pages and would do me no good. And I don't think the general public likes to learn how the tricks are done. Most people enjoy being baffled and trying to puzzle things out for themselves. But when they learn the secret, they lose interest, and after a time they miss that pleasure of surmise which has entertained them before. But I'm certain that many conjurers and amateurs will be grateful for the information I'm going to give them here. To start with, the bag must be a certain size in proportion to the size of the conjurer's hands. All the bags you buy in a shop are the same size, yet all conjurers' hands are of different sizes. The egg must not always be in the bag, and if you wish to perform the trick successfully, you must practice with the egg by itself. That alone may take you many years, and there are many sidelines which you must learn to perform with the egg. When I'm beginning the trick, I ask my victim to open his mouth, and when he does so, the egg drops out. This is what must happen. When he opens his mouth, the egg must be put in so quickly that the audience doesn't see. Care must be taken that the egg doesn't touch his teeth or it'll break. You must learn to shoot straight. When the egg enters, fright causes him to close his mouth, and when you tell him to open it, the egg appears again. I've had some strange experiences with this part of the trick. Sometimes, though, the egg's gone in quite all right, and it's refused to come out again. I've asked the man to open his mouth wider and wider, and in some cases I've had to force his teeth still wider apart. I cannot account for this because the egg seemed too big for the mouth, and yet I put it in quite all right at first. unless it be that at first he stretched his jaws to the fullest extent, permitting the egg to enter, but being unable to repeat the action, probably through stage fright, it made it appear that the egg was too big, hence my difficulty in removing it. When a conjurer can do that part of the trick with ease, he can feel confident of performing the whole trick well. It's taken me 40 years to attain my present proficiency. And even now, I'm thinking of all sorts of little improvements. For example, I've said that there's no need for the egg to be in the bag all the time. Even when the man is holding my hands, I often contrive to hide the egg in one of his pockets or under his lapel. With one improvement, I even went so far as to have a piece of cloth brought on stage and cut a length from it. The audience saw the cloth put onto a sewing machine, and I passed the finished bag around for inspection. I've never used confederates for this trick, and that means that I have to influence the man who is holding my hands. Sometimes this is very difficult, but I honestly believe that hypnotism and willpower play a very prominent part in this trick. I have to anticipate what is in the man's mind and what he's going to do so that I can be prepared. People watch differently. Some interrupt constantly and annoy me. Some are very clever and nearly catch me. Before now, I've asked the man to look into the bag and tell me whether the egg is there. Unfortunately, I placed the egg in the bag too soon, and I know just a little too late that he's going to see it lying inside. If he says yes, I can see the egg, the trick will be spoiled. By sheer force of will, I have to make him say no, although he's looked inside the bag and seen the egg, and I'm able to do that, though how I do it is a mystery to me. A conjurer working with strangers has to be a good judge of character. Although to the audience the presentation of the egg in the bag trick looks the same as usual, in reality it is never performed in exactly the same way. Each man who holds my hands has a different temperament and character, and watches me differently. I have to gain the confidence of each one and retain that confidence even while I'm making the audience laugh. Sometimes I'm so sure of my victim and know so well that if I wish he will look the other way, that I take the most flagrant risks, which of course amuses the audience immensely. Awkward things happen at times. Sometimes the man snatches the bag away from me, and I never pull it away, but I let him take it. Usually he will let go at once, whereas if I showed resentment, he might go still further and spoil my act for me. The worst occasions arrive when the man who comes to hold my hands is intoxicated, in which case I have to change almost the whole method. Sometimes a practical joker tries to score off me, but he rarely succeeds. One such occasion arose some time ago in the town of Surabaya in Java, when a Dutch gentleman tried to make himself the star of the evening and to turn the laugh against me. He'd been to see the show 2 or 3 times before, and he'd been on stage once before to hold my hands, so he knew something of what went on. When he came onto the stage, I asked him to look in my coat pocket, and to my great astonishment, he put his hand inside and brought out a real egg. He had friends in the audience who were in the know, and naturally there was laughter at my expense. Obviously, I couldn't let this gentleman score off me in this manner, and though I was at a loss for a moment, I soon took charge of the situation. I took the egg from him and palmed it, and then I made as if to return it, but of course it had disappeared. He looked for it eagerly, but failed to find it. The laugh was now against him, and then I turned to the audience and I said, "This gentleman has not realized that I can make the egg travel and land anywhere, and yet no one will see it." When the trick was over, I thanked him and he returned to his seat. He looked very smart in his white linen dress suit. He'd hardly sat down when one of his friends noticed the contents of an egg oozing from his coat pocket. He put his hand inside to see what was wrong, and most of the people sitting near saw egg on his fingers. The trick I played on him was this. While he was looking for the egg, I had surreptitiously slipped it into one of his pockets, and while I was shaking hands with him at the end of the trick, I purposely bumped him with my hip, thus breaking the egg in his pocket. I fancy that gentleman will not carry real eggs into a theatre again, or try to score off Horace Goldin. I could write a volume about this one fascinating trick alone. So much depends on the psychology of the victim, that there's endless variety in the performance of it. I find that people who have already seen it 100 times delight in seeing it again, for they come to realize the skill which is necessary for the smooth performance of it. Even those who know the trick well cannot say where the egg is at any given moment. So where is the egg when it's not in the bag? When I fold that baffling red velvet bag into 4 and placing it in my right hand hit it hard with my left? Where is the egg? When I place the bag on the man's head, surely he'd feel it if it were inside. And when I let him hold the bag, he would see the egg if it were there. Where then is that elusive egg? The answer to that question is the secret of the egg in the bag trick. And you can buy that trick for $1, but not my method of doing it. So there it is. I think that chapter is an amazing example of chutzpah and BS and some real great information all blended together. I made some notes as we were going through. By the way, I love that last line, don't you? You can buy the trick for $1, but not my method of doing it. I think so many people were doing the egg bag that the idea of this chapter was to make it seem like his egg bag was different to anyone else's. It's very smart. Right, we're going to end it right there. That's the end of the first part of the Horace Goldin egg bag investigation. Tune in to the next episode because I promise you there's going to be some major surprises plus a shocking revelation at the very end. I know I sound like I'm pitching some kind of soap opera, but it actually is rather a shocking revelation. So tune into the next episode where I make some amazing discoveries on the Horace Goldin egg bag. Magicians Only is sponsored by Magic on the Go, an encyclopedia of visual video magic in your pocket. Magic on the Go can't help but make you a better magician. It gives you the knowledge that you need to survive any situation thrown at you, whether you're a professional magician or an amateur. Anytime you pull out a deck of cards, you want to be able to handle the situation, just like Horace Goldin did. So I can tell you right now, join Magic on the Go and you will be able to handle anything thrown at you. If you are interested in the egg bag trick, Magic on the Go has a massive masterclass on that very trick. Over 80 videos teaching you about the bags and the eggs and the routines and the variations with glasses of liquid. Could you imagine doing the egg bag trick with a glass of whiskey? Yeah, there's methods for that. With paper bags, cloth bags, all kinds of bags. I was shocked at what I was able to discover and track down worldwide. Not only that, I bought all of the egg bags, and so you actually get to see them in person. It's quite a collection. So that's Magic on the Go. Links are in the show description. So that's Magic on the Go at magiconthego.com. I'll see you on the inside.